Now, if you set up the conditions in the of a brain that has a normal amount of coherence. But when we were measuring this super coherence, picture the entire 1,000 people clapping at the same time to the same rhythm very quickly. That orderliness creates a lot of energy too in the room. So the brain goes into these ecstatic states. That person is having a full-on sensory experience without their senses. Now imagine if your senses were heightened by 25% right now. Everything you're seeing, everything you're hearing, everything you're smelling.
It's heightened by 25%.
Everything you're tasting, everything you're feeling. If your senses are heightened by 25%, so is your awareness of everything around you.
And that's huge.
And you can't have awareness without consciousness, and you can't have consciousness without energy. So all of a sudden the brain switches on, they go into these high states of gamma, and the amount of energy in the brain, I'll give you an example. Most people, if we're measuring their vision, if we're measuring their liver enzymes, if we're measuring their height, if we took 1,000 people and we measured them, you would see this curve called the Z curve or bell curve. You draw a line right down the middle and you divide it equally in threes. That's 3 standard deviations above normal, 3 standard deviations below normal. That makes up 99.7% of the population. Doesn't matter what we measure.
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
It's just there.
Okay, so our measurements in energy in the brain is 200 standard deviations outside of normal, 300 standard deviations outside of normal, 400 standard deviations outside normal. That means you have to draw another 197 blocks, and that line just keeps getting smaller and smaller.
And the day you fall in love, from that moment to the next period, you are actually driving your vehicle with your conscious wishes and desires. And when both people are operating from wishes and desires and not programs, together they manifest heaven on earth. So the simple line is this: we are capable of experiencing heaven on earth. The only problem is, once we default back to the subconscious, we are not operating from our wishes and desires any longer. We are now operating from the downloaded programs. First there's 1, 2, 4, doubling, and after a week, 50,000 cells in a petri dish. The most important point is all the cells are genetically identical because they came from one parent. So I have 50,000 genetically identical cells. I split them up into 3 different petri dishes, but I change the culture medium. That's the environment in which cells live. I said, what is culture medium? It's the equivalent of blood. So if I'm growing mouse cells, I look at mouse blood, see the composition, and in a lab, synthesize culture medium based on that. When I grow human cells, I look at human blood composition and culture medium based on that. The significance is this: I can change the composition of the culture medium. So I have genetically identical cells in 3 dishes, but I change the chemistry a little bit in each of the 3 different dishes. So in environment A, the cells form muscle. In environment B, genetically identical cells in a different environment form bone. And in environment C, again, changing the chemical composition of the culture medium, but with genetically identical cells, the cells form fat cells. So the fate of the cells, muscle, bone, fat, wasn't based on genetics. They all had the same genes. It was based on the environment. So you say, okay, cells in a plastic petri dish, culture environment, what the heck does that have to do with me? And here's the answer. When you look in the mirror and see yourself, you see one human looking back, and I go, oh, one organism. I go, misperception. A human is comprised of 50 trillion cells. The cells are the living entity. When I say the word Bruce, that is a word that is covering a community of 50 trillion individual sentient cells. So the point is simple and kind of funny. A human being is a skin-covered petri dish. Underneath your skin, you have 50 trillion cells, and you have culture medium called blood. And I say, here's the point. It doesn't make a difference for the cell if it's in the plastic dish or the skin dish. The fate of the cell is not controlled by the genes, it's controlled by the composition of the culture medium. In your skin-covered petri dish, the culture medium is called blood. And I say, yeah. I say, and the brain is the chemist that determines what is the composition of that blood. And then I lead off to the next and most important fact. I say, well, what chemistry should the brain put into the blood? And I go, it's based on the perception of the mind, the interpretation of the mind. If I open my eyes and I see someone I love, the brain releases chemistry related to love, which is dopamine, pleasure, oxytocin, bonding to the one I love, vasopressin, a chemical in my blood that causes my cells to become more attractive to my mate. And growth hormone is released when you're in love, and that, by the name says, causes you to become healthy. So I'm saying, when a mind perceives love, the chemistry from that brain is chemistry that enhances your vitality. That's why when people are in love, they glow. You go, oh, look, you can see they're in love, how healthy they are. The culture medium in a body perceiving love is healthy. The same person, if they open their eyes and see something that scares them, will not release the same chemistry as in love. If you're afraid, you release stress hormones and inflammatory agents that affect the immune system. So I say, oh my goodness, if I open up my eyes and I see something that scares me, then cortisone and norepinephrine and inflammatory agents called cytokines are released into the culture medium, a different composition of culture medium. Point. The fate of the cell is dependent on the composition of the culture medium.